Hello friends, followers and fellow flight simmers. Welcome back to Microsoft Flight Simulator and to a very exciting weekend in Microsoft Flight Simulator. After almost a year after the release of the sim, we now finally started to see some high-fidelity airliners being released for Microsoft Flight Simulator. The first one to reach the finish line, I would say, so to speak, is the Just Flight's BAE 146 Professional. Beautiful aircraft, beautiful airframe, and a great addition to your virtual hangars. And in this video, we will be doing a review of the exterior model, interior model, textures, and we'll go over the cockpit and the panels and switches, knobs, instruments, whatnot. Next video, we will go through a cold and dark startup procedure for this aircraft, which I believe there are already some on YouTube done by some of the content creators who had access to the pre-release version of this aircraft, but I will do it in my style and go over the systems and try to explain the whys behind the actions that we do during the cold and start. This aircraft came or released on April 29th, a day before the Leonardo Simulations Fly the Mad Dog MD-82, and reached the finish line before that aircraft. And this was under my radar for a long time, and I was waiting for the release to have a look at it and hopefully enjoy this in the Microsoft Flight Simulator for the days and months to come. Again, for me, this is a very good addition to my hangar, and we will be looking at what this aircraft has to offer. Even by just sitting here and taking a look at the textures and how the sun shines over the fuselage and the airframe, it looks unreal and absolutely beautiful. Very well done, Just Flight, a beautiful, iconic airliner, also known as the Whisper Jet, and for bringing that airliner into Microsoft Flight Simulator with deep system simulation. So let's go around the exterior model, take a look at some panels, textures, and get some close-up views to see how they look. And we will jump into the interior of the aircraft and take a look at those textures as well. Starting at the nose, it is looking absolutely sharp. Nice PBR textures, high resolution textures as well. All the rivets, the seams, the panels are looking very nice, highly detailed. The pitot tubes, the front looks great. The windows, I'm trying to control the camera, still trying to get used to this Xbox controller to use the drone camera, but look at this. Absolutely beautiful, very well done, and it is very pleasing to look at. The door, which we will open here in a second, looks great. I thought it can be opened from outside, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it cannot. It comes with a bunch of liveries. The one we see here is the 300 variant, and you get two more variants, 200 and 100, as well as a hybrid and cargo. A total of 9 planes you are getting to enjoy in your virtual hangars. Going around to the engines and the wing, beautiful engine cowls and fan blades. They are nicely modeled. The landing lights, the rivets at the edge of the wings. All the decals and texturing of the engine cowls, absolutely beautiful. I think this is a task very well executed by Just Flight, in my personal opinion. These look very high quality, nothing to complain about, although like you see here, for areas that are less visible, I think it's expected to have some low resolution textures to save those precious frames, but aside from that, it looks beautiful. The top of the wingtips, the nav lights, the housing, the ailerons, yeah, I mean everything is very nice and shiny. And what I'm very impressed with is the main landing gear and how extensive this 3D modeling is. Look at this. The wheel itself has nice textures that looks like it has seen some days, and the undercarriage and the wheel bay looks absolutely beautiful. Look at these details, like all the hydraulic hoses, the hydraulic controllers, arms, linkage, everything here is very nicely done. Even the landing gear bay, the hydraulic lines and everything in here. I think it's expected to see some low-res textures, as I said, in the areas where you don't see as much, to save those frames and for performance reasons, but overall, this looks great. This looks absolutely beautiful. Where we move to the back of the aircraft, to the horizontal and vertical stabilizers, the APU air intake, exhaust, the rudder, the elevators. It is very pleasing to look at. Overall, I think this is a very nicely done 3D model by Just Flight. So congratulations on the execution of the 3D modeling of this aircraft, and I think they didn't simply just ported their P3D model into Microsoft Flight Simulator. They reworked the entire 3D model and the texturing to bring it to the visual standards of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and use the rendering engine of Microsoft Flight Simulator to change the look of this aircraft, which looks absolutely stunning. It is very pleasing to look at, as I said, and a beautiful aircraft to enjoy for the days to come. Very nice, very, very nice. It comes, as I said, with a bunch of liveries. I don't have a list, but it's in the documentation that you receive, and there is an extensive documentation that's put together by Just Flight, and with a test flight or tutorial flight to help you familiarize with the systems of this aircraft. So this is all about the exterior model. I think it speaks for itself. I don't have to say anything else. It is very good. I think that's all I say. I can't find enough words to describe how beautifully it looks in the simulator. We are currently at Gibraltar, as maybe you can tell before from that signature rock behind the airport here. And I selected this airport for the clear skies to showcase the exterior model and the light bouncing off of the airframe, which makes it much more pleasing to look at. Anyway, very nice exterior model, nicely detailed, enough detail to have good visual quality without sacrificing the performance, and I am happy with what I'm seeing here. Very beautiful. Next up is going to be the interior model. We will jump inside the cabin and start our trip or tour in the cabin to take a look at the interior model of this aircraft. One final look to the exterior model. I opened all the doors and cargo compartments, as well as connected a ground power unit, which is a custom ground power unit modeled by Just Flight to increase the immersion of this aircraft. Look at this, it has custom sounds. You probably are hearing this. It also has heat blur coming out of the exhaust of the generator, which is a nice touch. This looks absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful to look at. I was talking about the doors earlier. Look at this, the door textures, even the sides of the doors that you don't see are nicely modeled and of high quality. Going down to the cargo compartments, again, nice texture work here, and nice animations too, which I am not able to show here. But two cargo compartments of this aircraft, as well as the service doors and the rear passenger door that you see here, are very nicely modeled, which takes us into the cockpit or cabin. And as you see, the sound changes as you get inside. You hear the generator or the ground power unit less, or the sound is less in the cabin. This cabin is modeled, is enough resolution for a cabin model. To save the frames, I think this is not as high resolution as the other textures that we have seen so far, but I think that is totally acceptable to save those precious frames and save those frames for the operation of this high fidelity aircraft. Aside from that, I think this is enough quality to have some cabin views set up for the camera to enjoy this this beautiful aircraft and take a look at from different views when you are flying in this aircraft. You can also disable the cabin model to save more frames if you want to. You can fly without a cabin, and there is an option in the EFB that's provided with this aircraft, which will hopefully help some of you who doesn't have the most powerful hardware but still wants to enjoy this aircraft. Interior textures, as I said, not as high a resolution as the others we have looked at, but acceptable quality, and for performance reasons that's totally understandable. The galley at the back, the restrooms, yes, the textures are not quite readable, and it looks like a 2D texture rather than a 3D model. For the cabinets back here where they store the food and whatnot and prepare it, but as I said, it's acceptable. The emergency exit lights are nicely modeled, and they seem to have a higher quality than the rest of the galley area, and that is also true for the front galley and the front part of the cabin where you get to the cockpit door. Again, enough resolution to enjoy a cabin, but not too much to compromise the performance. The stairs extend and retract and slide into their sort of storage or housing right here, and look at all the details of these linkage and the door handles and the overall modeling here. Absolutely beautiful. I think it's fair to say that I am happy with this exterior model and the interior model. Again, very well done, Just Flight. Nicely executed job here. Which takes us into the cockpit of this aircraft, where us flight simmers or virtual captains will spend most of our time here. And by just looking from here, you can easily tell the quality of the textures, the seats, the PBR materials. Overall look of the cockpit is absolutely beautiful. From here we can jump into the captain's seat and take a closer look into those textures and panels and the quality of these textures as well. Easily readable instruments, nicely done textures, 3D attitude indicator or artificial horizon, and a standby artificial horizon here. We'll go over the instruments here in a little bit. Nice glass effects for the instruments overall, everywhere. An EFB is provided with a lot of options that I will go through. And side panels, nicely modeled. Passenger oxygen valve, nose wheel steering or tiller, pilot's oxygen supply, and a side panel, which we will talk about all the functions of these panels here in a little bit. A jump seat back here, which you can operate with that handle, and you have to move your camera to put it back into place using this lever here, which are also nice touches to this nicely done interior. Now we have ground power. I purposely turned it off. Let's turn it on and we will come back to the overhead and remove everything and do a cold and dark start from start rather than, you know, starting here in the next episode of this video. Let's start with the EFB and what you get in the EFB. You usually get it here. You have the Zulu time displayed at the top. You have an option to import your sim brief flight plan, which is nice. I thought this would be touchscreen, but you have to click here to move the pages. Maybe they will change this to a touchscreen functionality in a future update. But you can import your flight plane OFP from SimBrief when you do the setting. You have a nice map that displays the position of your aircraft, and you can zoom in out and center on your aircraft. Much anticipated feature, you have access to Navigraph charts. If you have Navigraph subscription, you can get your charts in the EFB, so no need to open additional windows or look to a different screen when you are looking at a chart to see your arrival, approach, departure. Very nice. Your aircraft options, to open the doors, connect the ground power unit, as well as refuel the aircraft, set the number of passengers you want to carry, and some weights and balances information along with the CG, and some states to quickly fly, I would say, and some announcements that you can use to increase the immersion. It also has some options here where you can turn off the interior cabin to save some frames if you are not worried about that. You can display the cockpit pilots. You can save the states of buttons and switches, and when you load back into the aircraft you will find it exactly where you left it. And you can also add auxiliary fuel tanks to increase the range of this aircraft. And there is a little slider here that updates the refresh rate of the gauges. I haven't played with this a whole lot, but I'm gonna set it over here, which was in the middle when I first loaded into the aircraft, and I'm gonna test it to see if this is enough refresh rate for the gauges to make me happy. One thing I recommend here is when you are on this page, do whatever you need to do and immediately get out of this page, because you can accidentally click and ruin your entire flight if you are up in the air and you leave this page open. It might not be true because I haven't flown in this aircraft yet. Maybe it is limiting where you can click when you take off, but it's something to be aware of when you are using the EFB. That home button will take you to the home page. There's a notes section like a scratch pad where you can take notes and use your keyboard. This might become very handy for those of you flying in VetSim who wants to take notes of the ATC and your instructions, especially your departure instructions. And some settings for the clock to make it 24 hours or 12-hour clock. You can use your SimBrief username to log in and bring your operational flight plan into the EFB, or if you check this box, if you leave this unchecked, you have to use your pilot ID to import your flight plan. The brightness setting for the EFB itself, and it has some nice themes that you can select from based on your preference. I kind of like this dark blue one as well as this lightly colored one. Depending on what time of the day I'm flying, I might change the theme, which is a nice touch by Just Flight 2. Alright, and you can turn off the EFB using the power button here. And that's all about the EFB, guys. Nicely modeled. Again, let's take a look at the cockpit textures, autopilot panel, engine instruments, warnings panel here, or warning lights, thrust modulation system, and everything works. You can touch, click, power on everything. I believe this is a sunshade that you can put up there. Oxygen system here. The handles can be folded. Another window shade here to block the sun, which is also a nice touch. And both sides, the handles can be folded back or brought back in place. And yeah, this is the interior. Overhead panel. Let's switch the view for a better view. Very nicely done. It looks busy, it looks intimidating, but when you get used to it, I think you will have no problems getting this aircraft powered on and ready for flight. And the upper overhead, some more systems and panels here. And if you move further up, you'll see the circuit breakers. These are not clickable. These are just 3D models here, but I don't think they are simulated in this aircraft. Maybe in the future, Just Flight has plans to introduce some failures to this aircraft, and this might become handy when that happens. But as of now, they seem to be static models of the circuit breakers. Alright, so that's the cockpit, and that's the pedestal, FMS, weather radar. We'll go over these. These handles over here are used to toggle the yoke visibility, which is also a nice touch. Instead of trying to click the base of the yoke, you can easily hide and bring your yoke back if you want to. And that's all I have about the interior of this aircraft. Back of the cockpit, again, nice textures here. No complaints at all. Very nicely done. Very well executed. Alright guys, let's silence that GPU and let's go through the panels and discuss what systems are located where. Alright, I have turned off the EFB, I have turned off the GPU, or disconnected the GPU, and closed all the doors to have some silence in the cockpit to start discussing the panels of the cockpit of 146 Professional. Let's start with the upper overhead panel, and then we will work our way down to the other panels. Above this panel is the circuit breakers that I have discussed earlier. Let's start from the left and go to the right and come down to the lower overhead, and then eventually the pilot's instruments, side panels, and the pedestal. Over here is your miscellaneous panel, which holds the switches for yaw damper master switches 1 and 2, AP master, autopilot master, avionics master, A and B systems. This is the ignition system, A or B or both systems. I am not sure how this is used in the real aircraft. Maybe you just change between system A and system B to save wear and tear when you are starting the engines, or you keep it at both. I have to go through the checklist to understand this. I'm still reading through it, but that's the ignition system here. Brake fans, or the switch for the brake fans, anti-skid, auto spoilers, it's inoperable, so that switch doesn't do anything, and then the lift spoilers, yellow and green. Down below is your hydraulic system, gauges and the switches. The hydraulic quantity for both systems, yellow and green, and then the pressure for yellow and green system, and some lights to help you understand the system state or the faults of the system. This aircraft has 2 pumps on engines 2 and 3 for the hydraulic system, and a DC and AC pump, and a power transfer unit, like in an Airbus, that transfers the hydraulic pressure from one system to the other to power or pressurize the other system. In the middle is your fire control system or fire system, and extinguisher handles for all 4 engines. Right next to it, and by the way, this is an air inlet and a console light here, which I believe you can rotate and make it shine wherever you want, which is a nice touch as well. And your ground tests for the aircraft systems, engine overspeed, engine fire, APU overspeed, engine and APU extinguisher test, smoke detection test, stall warning, stall ident, speed warning, anti-skid fault, zone loops, no squat switch system test, rear bay high temp test, flap safety test, flap control fault for yellow and green system, and horns and squat switch. I think switch. I have to read this through. But these are various tests that you can perform. All of them works. And I believe you will be able to read this through the manual. Over here is the lights panel for some of the lights, not all of it. There are some other light switches at the lower overhead. But entry lights, wing lights, and logo lights. Smoking, I'm thinking this is no smoking, but that text is that has a typo, I guess. The texture has a typo. Cabin emergency lights, beacon, strobe, and nav lights here, where you have high and low intensity based on the time of the day that you are flying. Down below is your air conditioning system, temperature control switches, auto or manual for cabin and flight deck, whether you want to want it warm or cool, and then the fans for flight deck and cabin fan. The temperature selector knobs, and then the displays for the cabin temperature, dock temperature for the left and right systems. Down below, lower overhead panel. Let's start from the left and go to the right again. Fuel system. Entire panel is dedicated to the fuel system except this lower part. Fuel feed tanks and the gauges for the feed tanks for 4 feed tanks here. Center tank transfer switch that transfers the fuel from center tank to the wing tanks when you are airborne. Fuel temperature display, cross-feed valve, left and right standby pumps, common feed valves here, and then the fuel pump switches here. Down below is the cabin emergency and ground call switches, where you press to call the cabin or ground or emergency call and push to cancel the calls. Standby compass and eye locator. In the middle is the electrical system panel. At the top, transformer rectifier 1 and 2. This is basically a transformer that transfers AC to DC, and it's the display shows how many amps each system is generating. Your battery amps or amp meter is here. Your voltmeter, rotary knob to select the battery voltages, or standby generator, external DC, transformer rectifier 1 and 2 to check those voltages. battery switches for battery 1 and 2, and then a rotary knob for the voltage display for engine generators, APU generator, and standby generators and inverters and external AC. Some lighting for the system status indication, external AC, this is your ground power switch pretty much, bus ties for AC and DC buses, standby inverter switch to arm or override or keep it off, and the standby generator switch. And these are the generator gauges to display what amps each generator is generating. This aircraft has two engine-driven generators for engine 1 and engine 4, and engine 3 and 2 are reserved for hydraulic pumps. Because these are small engines, I think that's why it's designed this way, so that two of the engines are used to provide the electrical power, the other two is used to provide the hydraulic power to the aircraft. Your galley switch, APU generator, and engine generators for engine 1 and 4 to turn them on. In the middle at the top is the APU panel. APU fire extinguisher here under discarded switch, and then APU RPM gauge and the turbine gas temperature gauge that displays the turbine gas temperature of the APU. Start and stop switch for the APU and some enunciation for the APU statuses. In the middle is the engine starter panel. So this is the starter power. This usually stays at norm. You can start using external DC, or you can choose to start when the weather is cold at the down position. Engine selector switch to start different engines, and the starter master switch to energize the system. This is the starter for each engine. Continuous ignition, as the name suggests, it ignites continuously during takeoff and landing. And then engine start run switch. Down below is your ice protection enunciations and ice protection system for the engines. So this entire panel is engines related. And there is another ice protection over here for the airframe and the windshields. Pressurization system, very easy to use. Usually leave it at auto and set your cruising altitude, which is seen in the inner dial here. Like if we were to fly at flight level 250, that roughly comes to a cabin temperature or cabin pressure of 6,000 feet, and then the rest will be handled by the system. Down below is the airframe ice protection system, windscreen heat, auxiliary left and right vane and pitot heaters. And down below is the outer and inner wing anti-ice or de-ice switches and ice detection system, master switch here, and then the tail anti-ice down below it. The far right side is the bleed air system, cabin breathe air, cabin air recirculation or fresh. So this is your recirculation valve. Packs 1 and 2, ram air that provides ram air at low altitudes if any of these systems fail. Air supply for APU air, which is APU bleed. And then the temp detection for left and right wing de-icing boots, I guess I would say. And then the engine bleed system switches are here. Down below is some light controls for enunciation lights, panel lights, and sort of integral lights, and the lights test switch here. And there's another glare shield light knob here to dim or brighten the glare shield. And the very tip of the overhead, you have the screen wash and rain repellent on both sides for left and right windshield. Flight deck emergency lights to turn them on or arm them. runway turn-off lights or runway exit lights in 146 language, landing lights, and wipers, switches, and fasten seat belts. Going down to the pilot side, side panel is your audio panel for different audio sources like VHF 1.2, speaker, nav, ADF, DME, etc. And it all has a test that you can run and see, which we will look at when we are doing the cold and dark startup. Cockpit voice recorder, which has a built-in test, and then more knobs to control the lights for the floodlights and panel lights for the captain side. Again, the pedal adjust handle is used to hide the yoke. Captain's instruments, artificial horizon here, a very nice 3D model. Flight mode or initiations are here, or some initiations for the captain are here. Airspeed indicator, clock, and chrono. I'm tempted to say CDI, but this is more or less a vertical status indicator, VSI, where you can switch between ADF and VOR. That will point the needle to the selected station. This is your CDI actually, with DME information at the top and the ground speed. Altimeter, radio altitude and decision height. So that's your radio altimeter for detecting the altitude you are at above ground level. This is a little neat digital display that has two functions. One is a vertical speed indicator, two is the TCAS system. A standby altimeter, I assume, and standby artificial horizon here. I haven't checked these switches, so I don't know what they do. If you do, let me know in the comments, please. I'm still reading through the manual. Your brake pressures for yellow and green hydraulic systems. And this switch controls whether you are using radio navigation or GPS navigation on RNAV. Marker beacon, high or low. I think this is for the marker beacon audio. We have to test it when we are flying this aircraft. And then the annunciations controls for whether you want them dim or bright, and a dimmer here, and a test switch to test the lights. In the middle, in the middle is the engine instruments for the 4 tiny engines. 3 triple gauge for oil temperature, oil pressure, and oil quantity for each engine, and 1 turbine gas temperature, and 2, and then fuel flow gauges. And very bottom is the fuel gauges for left, right, and center tanks. Next to it is the engine vibration display here. This displays how much vibration is present in each engine, and it has a test function to make sure it's operating as it should. Flap position indicator and the roll spoiler indicators are here. Some more, this is the landing gear lights for nose and the main landing gears left and right. Those 3 green, famous 3 green lights, and then some warning indications here in this panel. Landing gear switch or landing gear lever, and this little placard is a handy one to set your V-speed box for the airspeed indicator, as well as the box for the M1 NTGT based on your TMS calculation, which stands for Thrust Modulation System. Over on the co-pilot side of things, which I have to get a little bit closer, I guess. I don't know why my view didn't work. Okay, there we go. Some enunciations for the first officer, master warning system, and TMS light switch or dimmer knob, and the master warning test switch here. Thrust modulation system, which we will discuss when we are doing the cold and dark startup. Cabin altitude indicator, whether the cabin is climbing, altitude is climbing or descending, and then the delta P displayed here. Again, VSI, airspeed indicator, artificial horizon, altimeter, clock, and CDI, as well as the vertical speed indicator and TCAS system and the radar altimeter, doubled for the first officer. Different from the captain, you also get an outside air temperature gauge here, which will become very handy to have it next to the TMS when you are programming your TMS for derating the engines for takeoff calculations. Co-pilot's side panel is a little bit different. Let's get rid of the yoke. This is the flight recorder where you set the date, 30th of April, first leg of the day, and the last 3 digits is reserved for your flight number. Audio panel for the first officer, and some light knobs to control the lights on the first officer side. First officer oxygen supply, and the main oxygen system controls are here, where you can turn on the system to do some checks and see the passenger and main supply, oxygen quantities and whatnot. And the rest over here is these little sliders to provide floor air to the cockpit, flight deck, or forward of the cockpit, I believe. And that's about it for the first officer side, which brings us to here, to the pedestal. Upper pedestal, your FMC, FMS, however you want to call it, two comm radios for communications, and the middle one is the weather radar, which I believe is in-op at the moment due to the limitations of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Terrain display and LNAV 1.2 to split it. That displays the terrain based on your selection here, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I'm still reading through. I'm not super sure about this. Down below is your throttle quadrant and your trim wheel, and then some trim settings for rudder, ailerons, panel lights to dim the panel's lights. Config check is for your takeoff configuration check. If you don't see a horn, that means you have everything set up correctly, and this cancels that horn. Disconnecting the ailerons, I believe these are the disconnect handles for aileron and rudder elevators. Brakes, this is the parking brake. It can operate on both hydraulic systems, yellow or green, but it defaults to the yellow system. Aileron trim, which we discussed. Pitch trim, this is an electric pitch trim to pitch up and down. And yaw damper switch and autopilot master switch is here. Your ADF radio, transponder, brake temperature display, and some more knobs for console lighting. That is pretty much the pedestal, and I think that covers all the panels in the cockpit. And the only thing we haven't discussed is the flight control panel or autopilot panel. These are the cancel switches for master caution and master warning. Your nav1 radio over on this side. Autopilot modes, nav1 and nav2 course and heading. Displays. Actually, I think you set your heading using the... Let me just not make a comment on that just yet. Altitude selector here, and then nav2 radio and flight director switches over on the sides of the FCP. And the last one is the standby compass here. That pretty much covers the entire cockpit and what you should expect to see in the cockpit. These 3 balls here is for your cockpit position. where you are looking from this side, you shouldn't be seeing the second yellow ball. It should stay behind this brownish dark color ball. And on the Copilot side, when you switch over on that side, which I should have done like this, the Copilot shouldn't see the yellow ball on the captain side, which then tells you that you are in the right seating position. So that's what that it is, that is used for. Okay guys, I think this is going to conclude this video. Next episode will hopefully come very shortly, which we will go through the cold and dark startup procedure for the 146 Professional. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button. And if you are another channel subscriber who stumbled upon this video, consider subscribing to get notified for future videos and turn on the bell to get notified. Last words to developer Just Flight. Beautiful looking airframe, very nice 3D model, very nice system simulation, and a great cockpit. I think I will enjoy every minute in this iconic airliner, also known as the Whisper Jet, in short hops everywhere across the world. But I believe this aircraft was used a lot in Europe, not so much in the United States, but well, the world is ours, so we get to select where we are departing and where we are going to. So again guys, thanks for being here with me today in this review or short review of the Just Flight's recently released 146 Professional, and I will be seeing you in the next episode to go through the cold and dark procedures for this aircraft.